I realized I was the ghost in the system the night our top sales guy raised a glass at the holiday party, celebrating another year of perfect uptime, without once glancing my way. That flawless uptime? That was me. The 3 a.m. patches. The server restarts during my kid's birthday. Debugging while trapped in a dentist's chair. The product may have carried the company logo, but the lifeblood running through it was mine. I was the quiet one in the background, making sure nothing collapsed mid-demo in front of clients. When I fixed the little glitches, nobody noticed. But when something big went wrong, I was the one thrown under the spotlight while everyone else stayed safely out of reach, tossing blame like confetti. And my boss, Mark, he thrived on that imbalance. Mark was the kind of manager who declared every meeting critical, then spent the first 10 minutes rambling about his golf game. He never needed to raise his voice. He'd just lean back in that overpriced chair, arch an eyebrow, and drop a dagger of a question like, "So why didn't you think of that sooner?" in front of a dozen people. Subtle enough that it couldn't be called an attack, sharp enough to sting for the rest of the day. Once, during a quarterly review, he joked that if I ever quit, the whole platform might crumble, for maybe 5 minutes, before they replaced me with a cheaper contractor. Everyone laughed, because what else do you do when the guy signing your checks takes a jab at you? I forced a smile too, but I stored that moment away with the growing collection of others. I filed away a lot. Quick side note since you're here. 97% of people who listen to these stories never hit subscribe. If you're in that group, do me a favor, click it. That one click keeps this whole thing alive and fuels the caffeine that powers these revenge stories. Anyway, back to Mark. Mark had a habit of popping into technical meetings just long enough to misunderstand everything, then ducking out halfway through for a client call. Yet, when a project launched, there he was in the company newsletter, posing in front of a whiteboard covered in my handwriting. Later, he'd clap me on the shoulder and say, "You're a real team player," like he was handing out medals. I learned quickly that if you wanted credit, you had to claw for it. But the harder you pushed, the deeper he dug in. His real gift was people management, as if they were chess pieces. He didn't care if you liked him. He only cared that you remembered who controlled the board. I watched him quietly sideline a senior dev, rerouting all her work until she eventually walked out. He'd act shocked when people left, like they'd just ghosted him for no reason. He loved keeping folks just off balance. It made them easier to move around. For me, it wasn't a dramatic explosion. No shouting, no storming out. Just a slow burn. I kept doing my job so well he couldn't justify cutting me loose. Until I realized I had something in my back pocket that made his power games look like child's play. But that card would be played later. At the time, my days were a blur of 12-hour shifts, quiet fixes, and watching Mark soak up praise for things he couldn't explain if you fed him the first 3 sentences. I stopped drinking at happy hours. Too many offhand comments had a way of twisting back to him, fueling his next little performance. I sat at the far end of the conference table, notebook open, eyes lowered. Reliable. Steady. The guy you called at 2 a.m. when everything went sideways. And every time I pulled us back from the brink in front of a client, I'd glance over and catch that smirk. That satisfied grin that told me he'd just turned my work into his victory. I told myself I didn't care. At least, that's what I repeated often enough. Because while he played office politics, I was quietly building something that had nothing to do with his approval, or his smirk, or his chessboard. The truth? He didn't even know the game I was playing. And by the time he figured it out, his king would already be in check. And fittingly, it happened on a Tuesday. Because Tuesdays always carry bad news. They land too early and too late in the week to fight back. I had just finished untangling a brutal memory leak that had been bleeding server performance for months, when Mark's assistant appeared at my desk, tapping her tablet like she was double-checking an execution order. "Mark wants you in his office. HR will be there." Mark plus HR wasn't a meeting. It was a sentence. His glass-walled corner office overlooked the entire floor like a hunter's perch. Walking toward it felt like stepping onto a stage. Keyboards suddenly quieter. Conversations slipping into whispers. Heads pretending not to follow me, though I could feel their eyes. Mark was reclined in his chair when I walked in, one ankle perched on his knee, relaxed. Next to him sat an HR rep with a folder across her lap, wearing that smile people give when the decision's already made. Mark gestured to the chair opposite him. "Let's get right to it," he said smoothly, as if he were closing a routine deal. "We're restructuring the department. Unfortunately, that means we'll have to let you go." He let the words linger heavy in the air. HR slid the packet across the desk like she was serving a fancy meal. "Effective immediately," she added, as though it might have slipped my mind. Then came the flourish. Mark's lips curled into that smirk and he said, "You can collect your plant once facilities approves." The way he said it, like retrieving a potted plant required official clearance, was pure Mark. I thought about the little bonsai at my desk, the one I'd kept alive through 2 office moves and a brutal winter when the heat nearly froze it solid. He wanted it to be the final insult, his last word in a conversation he believed he controlled. I didn't give him the pleasure. I nodded once, tucked the folder under my arm, and stood. "All right," I said evenly. "I'll get out of your way." The walk back to my desk was just as quiet as the walk-in. Fingers froze on keyboards, coworkers avoided eye contact. Everyone watched silently, like it was the final episode of a long-running show. I slid my laptop into its case, set my badge on top, and pulled the zipper shut. The sound cracked like the snap of a trap closing. No one offered sympathy. No one said good luck. In our office, showing support for someone on their way out was the fastest way to paint a target on your own back. I'd seen it before. I didn't take it personally. Inside, though, I wasn't hollowed out or panicked the way Mark probably pictured. I wasn't rehearsing resume lines or calculating how to cover my mortgage. I was thinking about the folder in my desk at home, thick with signed contracts, legal notes, and one patent certificate with my name printed in clean, black ink. The very thing that could rip the floor out from under the company faster than Mark could craft another smug remark. As I left with my bag slung over my shoulder, I caught my reflection in the lobby glass. Calm. Too calm, maybe. Mark thought this was the closing scene. That my story ended in his office with a plant-shaped insult. But the truth? This wasn't the end. It was just the pivot. And the next chapter was already unfolding. 2 years before Mark pulled his little collector plant trick, I was in my apartment at 1:30 a.m., half-eaten lo mein on the desk, when I finally cracked the problem that had been eating at me for months. It wasn't part of my job, at least not officially. It was one of those ideas that wouldn't let go. The kind that follows you into the shower, interrupts you mid-aisle at the grocery store, keeps you awake when everyone else is asleep. I'd been watching how our system processed data, bloated steps, pointless loops, countless inefficiencies no one wanted to touch because it worked. But working was bleeding the company dry in storage fees and compute costs. What I'd mapped out in my notebook was an entirely different approach. Lean, sharp, capable of cutting resource use by a third with zero performance loss. Its beauty was in its clarity. I could explain it to a junior dev in under a minute, but any competitor would need years to rebuild it from scratch. When I got it running, I just sat back, staring at the output. Clean. Fast. Elegant. Like stumbling on a hidden door in a house you've lived in your whole life. I knew exactly what I had, and I knew it didn't belong to the company. Every line had been written on my own machine, on my own time, with nothing pulled from their codebase. It wasn't theirs. It was mine. A week later, I filed a provisional patent in my own name. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't tell anyone. Better to have it officially planted than leave it buried in a personal folder. A provisional patent is like putting a flag in the ground. You've got a year to decide if you want to push it to a full claim. Most people only bother if they're planning to sell. I wasn't, not then. I just wanted it protected. Then the company stumbled onto it. I'd mentioned the concept casually at lunch with another engineer, and 2 months later, I saw pieces of my design showing up in production. They hadn't copied my exact code, just the structure, the method, the small efficiencies I'd strung together. Not theft, not technically, but close enough that my stomach twisted the first time I saw it running. When I raised it with legal, they brushed it off. Since you haven't commercialized it independently, it's not really relevant, one lawyer said, barely glancing up from his laptop. Translation: if it doesn't make you money, we don't care. I walked out knowing 2 things. 1. They didn't see the value. 2. They had no clue how deeply they were leaning on it. Over the next 18 months, that algorithm seeped into everything: client tools, back-end workflows, new features Mark was showing off at conferences. My framework was the backbone, but they treated it like another cog in the machine, never once stopping to think the foundation might not actually be theirs. That's when I began keeping records. Every update, every deployment, every product built on my design, I logged them all. Not revenge, not yet. More like insurance. Proof that I wasn't as powerless as Mark wanted me to believe. And the whole time, I had one quiet, almost guilty comfort. The provisional filing was still sitting there, time-stamped and unshakable. All it needed was the right moment to become a full patent. And when that moment arrived, I wouldn't just have a card up my sleeve. I'd have the card that could flip the entire table. About a month before the Tuesday ambush in Mark's office, I sat in a cramped conference room at the back of a small law firm. The kind with filing cabinets older than the paralegal who brought me coffee. Across from me was Victor, an IP attorney I'd trusted for years. He could read patent filings the way a cardiologist reads an X-ray. We'd worked together once before on a side project, so I knew he had two rare skills: protecting an idea and burying a landmine in plain sight. I slid the thick folder across the table. "It's time," I said. He didn't need clarification. The provisional patent I'd filed 2 years earlier was about to expire, and I wasn't going to let it vanish. We were converting it into a full patent, ironclad, airtight, untouchable. Victor flipped through the pages, brow furrowed as he checked every comma. "Did you write all of this outside work hours?" he asked. "Every line," I said. "On my own hardware. No company resources, no overlap with their repo. Original commits are time-stamped. I've got the receipts." "Good," he said and kept reading. For 3 hours we honed the language to a blade's edge. Anything that could give them grounds to claim it as work for hire was stripped out and replaced with wording that made it unmistakable. This was independent intellectual property, fully mine under U.S. law. We even added a clause clarifying that any use without explicit licensing would be infringement. The phrasing wasn't just defensive, it was aggressive. If they ever challenged it, they'd walk straight into a buzzsaw. When Victor slid the final draft back to me, I felt the tension in my chest harden into something colder, steadier. "Once this is filed," he said, "there's no walking it back. You'll own it outright. No company claim, no shared rights. And if they're already using it," he let the sentence trail off. "If they're already using it," I said, signing my name, ink bleeding faintly into the paper, "then they're already in violation." We filed that afternoon. No announcement, no drama, just a quiet submission to the USPTO, a digital confirmation in my inbox, and the knowledge that the clock had begun ticking differently. From then on, every time Mark strutted through the office, bragging about team innovation, I heard the silent tightening of a spring. Every feature built on my framework was another turn of the screw. They thought they were building their empire. I knew they were deepening their reliance on something they didn't own. I didn't rush. That's the thing about leverage. You don't waste it on small plays. You wait until the stakes are high enough that when you pull the pin, the whole structure shakes. And I had a hunch that moment would arrive sooner than anyone expected. So when the termination meeting finally came, I didn't have to scheme or scramble. The trap was already set. The filing was part of the public record. My name was the one on it, not theirs, and now all that was left was deciding when and how to play it. That night, my apartment sat in near silence. The only sounds the fridge's low hum and the occasional car slicing through rain on the street below. My laptop glowed on the dining table, the termination packet Mark had handed me earlier shoved aside like some forgotten takeout flyer. I wasn't pacing, shouting, or replaying the meeting in his office. I'd already filed that moment away as finished. The focus now was the move ahead. I scrolled through my contacts until I stopped on the name I needed. Ellen Ray, VP of Product at our biggest rival. I'd first crossed paths with her at a Denver industry conference years back. Since then we'd kept up light, casual contact, little jokes about overpriced mixers or awkward keynote speakers. But Ellen was sharp, always scanning for the opening others missed. And I knew exactly how she'd read this one. I hit call. 2 rings later, her voice came on, curious, warm. Well, well. What do I owe the honor? I've got something you'll want to see, I said flatly. No banter. No build-up. A fully granted patent in my name, covering a technology your competitors have been using daily, without any rights to it. Silence stretched for a beat. Then a low, intrigued laugh. Go on. I laid it out cleanly and concisely. Independent development, clear chain of custody, airtight legal groundwork. I didn't need to oversell it. Ellen picked up the implications instantly. Send me the documents, she said, her tone now edged and serious. While we stayed on the line, I sent the encrypted email. A minute later, I could hear the faint rustle of papers, as if she were flipping through a file, though I knew it was just PDFs. It's solid, she muttered under her breath. And they've been using this how long? 18 months. Minimum. It's tied directly into their core systems. Pull it, and their entire backend collapses. I could practically hear her smile. You aiming for exclusive licensing? She asked. Exactly. And quickly. From there, the tone shifted to pure business. Licensing fees. Exclusivity periods. Non-disclosure terms. Ellen barely bargained. She knew the weight of what she was holding, and she understood that time was critical. Every passing hour before the ink dried was another chance my old company might glimpse what was heading their way, but they wouldn't. They'd be too busy patting themselves on the back for cutting me loose. By the time we ended the call, it was past midnight. The email chain with Ellen's legal team was already piling up with timestamps, each one like chips stacking on a table. They were moving fast, faster than I'd even counted on. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I wasn't giddy, I wasn't triumphant. I was steady, focused. Like I'd just slid a piece across the board, knowing the game had tipped to checkmate for the other side. Revenge, I'd always believed, wasn't about fireworks or slammed doors. It was about precision, waiting for the exact shot, then firing only when you knew it would land. That call to Ellen, that was the shot. And by morning, the first cracks would already be spreading through the glass walls of Mark's office. Ellen didn't stall. By 9 a.m., her legal team had gone over every clause, every timestamp, every bit of documentation I'd sent. The verdict was what I expected. The patent was ironclad. No gray area, no escape hatch for my old company. We jumped on a video call, her in a sleek glass office, me at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee and a blank notebook I didn't bother writing in. Her first words cut straight through. We'll take it. Exclusivity, full term, effective immediately. Your first payment lands within 72 hours. The simplicity was almost anticlimactic. No haggling. No long-winded negotiations. They knew this was worth far more than I was asking, but they also knew speed was the only currency that mattered. Every hour before the announcement was one more tick on my old company's countdown clock. An hour later, contracts hit my inbox. I read through them twice, not out of distrust but because this was the line. This was where it shifted from possibility to inevitability. My signature meant no turning back. I signed digitally, time-stamped, and sent them off without ceremony. 10 minutes later, Ellen called again. Press release is finalized. Hitting the wire this afternoon. I pictured the chain reaction. A junior analyst in PR spotting the headline, forwarding it up the ladder until it landed on the CTO's desk like a live grenade. By the time Mark laid eyes on it, the fuse would already be burning hot. Ellen read me the draft aloud. Competitor secures exclusive rights to breakthrough. The algorithm behind tomorrow's systems. No need to spell out my old company's name. Everyone in the industry already knew who had just been gutted. For anyone else, the next quarterly report would spell it out with ruthless clarity. We had the timing orchestrated down to the exact minute. Their PR release would drop just before East Coast lunchtime, the perfect window when executives kill time scrolling headlines between meetings. Just enough circulation before the markets closed to guarantee a noticeable dip in my former company's stock by day's end. When we hung up, I didn't pace or obsess over email. I went about my morning, watered the plants, hauled out the trash, poured another cup of coffee. The work was already complete. From here on, it was just momentum pulling everything down. There's a sharpness in moments like that. It's not about gloating or victory. It's the calm of knowing the pieces are aligned so precisely that once released, nothing can stop them. I'd wound the spring weeks ago. Ellen had only just let it snap. By sundown, my old firm would be choking on more than spin control could handle. And Mark, the one who once laughed about how replaceable I was, would discover just how costly that replacement turned out to be. The press release went live at 11:42 a.m. sharp. No need for flash or gimmicks, just a headline that landed like a blunt weapon. Competitor acquires exclusive rights to the core technology fueling industry growth. Within minutes, it was everywhere. First the trade journals, then the click-hungry tech blogs, and soon the major business outlets who never miss a corporate bloodbath. By noon, LinkedIn feeds were ablaze, every repost laced with speculation. Does old company rely on this tech? What will this do to their Q3? I didn't need to guess what was happening in Mark's office. I could see it in my head. Middle managers craning over cubicles, scrolling the release on their phones, whispering in private chats. Have you seen this? Slack channels erupting with panic side threads. The market didn't bother waiting for internal spin. By 1 p.m., shares had dropped 6% and were still slipping. Not an all-out crash, but in corporate language it was a red siren blazing across the trading floor. Investor relations was surely already drafting lines full of phrases like business continuity and minimal operational impact. I sat at my kitchen table, fresh coffee in hand, reading the release again for the 5th time. My name wasn't in the headline. It didn't need to be. But it was sitting neatly in the body of the text where I wanted it. Patent holder. My name. Exclusive licensing agreement with competitor guarantees sole use of the technology. There's a unique satisfaction in watching people connect the dots without you saying a word. Everyone in our tight corner of the industry knew exactly who I was. And everyone at my old company most definitely did. The fact that I hadn't made a single public comment, that alone would drive Mark mad. He'd be desperate to know what I'd told them. How much money changed hands, whether this had been my scheme from the beginning. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't stolen, hacked, or broken any law. I'd only exercised a right I secured 2 years ago, waiting until the timing was perfect. Somewhere in his glass office, Mark was staring at the same release for the 10th time, jaw tightening with every pass. And down the hall, the CTO's phone was lighting up with calls from board members, investors, and journalists circling like sharks. All I had to do was sip my coffee and watch the reaction unfold exactly as planned. The fuse was lit. Nothing could snuff it out now. By late afternoon, the storm was in full force. My phone stayed quiet, but the updates still came. A trusted friend from accounting, one of the few there I actually respected, kept sending me a running commentary from the battlefield. The first message was just 4 words. CTO is losing it. The second came moments later. You won't believe this, conference call on speaker, whole floor can hear. I could picture it vividly, the executive conference room, blinds half drawn, coffee cups scattered, and the CTO at the head of the table, voice booming through speakerphone. My friend typed it word for word. What I don't understand, Mark, is why your name is on this patent, and why. As of this morning, it's now licensed solely to our biggest rival. There was a pause long enough that you could hear the faint shuffle of papers as Mark scrambled to compose himself. Then came his halting response. It was part of the internal documentation process. I supervised it. You insisted on putting your name on it. The CTO's voice cut in sharp and precise, making the whole table flinch. And now every investor, every client, every media outlet believes you handed over our core technology to the competition. There it was, the knife twisting exactly where I aimed it. Mark's ego, the same one that made him plaster his name on work he couldn't explain if his life depended on it, had just made him the public face of a corporate catastrophe. The executives weren't staring at the CTO. They were staring at Mark. And in rooms like that, perception is reality. Name on the problem? You are the problem. Back in my kitchen, I stirred cream into my coffee and leaned over to water the little Pow's plant Mark once mocked. Its leaves had grown. Broader. Fuller. Thriving in ways he'd never imagined possible. A message from my friend popped up a few minutes later. They're demanding answers. He's sweating through his shirt. I smiled, not from cruelty, but from precision. This wasn't about shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. It was about lining up the dominoes perfectly and watching them fall. Mark had spent years making me the invisible figure in the room. Now, with the company's future dangling on a thread, he couldn't disappear if he tried. And me? I was exactly where I wanted to be. Unnoticed, coffee in hand, plants flourishing, watching it all unfold from the quiet sanctuary of my own home. The next morning didn't offer them the mercy of a quiet news cycle. At 8:07 a.m., Ellen's company released a follow-up statement. Short, surgical, devastating. It didn't just confirm the exclusivity deal. It included the publicly filed patent record in black and white. Right there under inventors were my name and marks. No backstory needed. Anyone reading that line could draw their own conclusions. The same Mark whose name was once proudly displayed was now the one who'd allowed that patent to slip straight into a competitor's hands. Industry blogs tore him apart. One headline screamed, "From innovation to litigation. How one exec handed tech to the competition." By 9 a.m., the board had called an emergency meeting. My friend in accounting texted me from the elevator. "Looks like half the exec team just got summoned. Mark looks like he aged 10 years overnight." Inside that room, chaos was spiraling. Investor calls piled up. Clients demanded assurances. The legal team scrambled for any grounds to sue. They tried. God, did they try. But Victor's airtight patent language left no holes. Every timestamp, every version history, every sworn declaration proved the work was independently developed. I owned it outright. They'd been using it without a license for nearly 2 years. When legal finally delivered the verdict, "There's nothing we can do. No claim exists. It must have hit like a sledgehammer." I pictured the silence in that room, the quick, nervous glances exchanged, the mental tally of careers going up in smoke. Somewhere mid-meeting, Ellen's PR team updated their press page with a photo of the two of us shaking hands. Taken years ago at that Denver industry conference. Caption: "Longtime industry relationship results in strategic partnership." Petty. Perfect. By noon, whispers spread internally that Mark's role was under review. A polite euphemism for cleaning out your desk. Char, once smugly watching me leave, was now quietly drafting exit paperwork for one of their own golden boys. I spent the afternoon in my living room, sunlight streaming across the hardwood, sipping coffee while pruning that same pal's plant Mark had tried to mock. Its vines now trailed thick and green along the edge of the pot in lazy spirals. Alive. Thriving. So was I. Every glance at that plant reminded me of something Mark never grasped. In the right hands, even the smallest, most overlooked thing can grow until it dominates the entire room. Appreciate you sticking around, Legends of the Break Room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old manager spill their coffee in fear.